Season nine's meta has shifted a lot over this season. Or has it, actually? Today, I'm going to go ahead and break down what's been meta over the course of this season, why these comps were considered meta, and loosely how these comps were and are played. I'm no pro analyst, so I won't lie, I probably won't get all of the details right, but I think that leads to some interesting discussion, and I'd love to hear your feedback. So, of course, Season 9 brought some sweeping changes to the game. The most important aspect that brought a lot of these comps to the limelight was the general nerf to sustain. Higher health pools, mixed with the damage passive. Gone are the days of BAP hard pocketing his tank that had ungodly amounts of damage reduction. Your team receives effectively less healing, thus fights can't be nearly as long. So basically what I'm going to start doing is I'm just going to play some stuff in the background for you guys, for you to look at how these comps play. For this first one, I actually am playing a Spylo video because I literally couldn't find any official matches played on this comp because it was before OWCS started and I couldn't find anything else like scrims. So we'll be watching some scrim analysis in the background. But go ahead. So the first, and the natural progression away from drawing a fight out with sustain is stopping it before it can even begin. And that's probably how we landed on our first meta, which is this Ball, Zen, Lucio, Tracer, +1, Echo, Soj, even Sombra. That's how we got there. It is the dive comps of all dive comps. It is, if you mess it up one time, it's probably over. For a brief overview, this comp relies on Ball, Tracer, and the other DPS setting up on angles and staging dives with the help of Lucio. Lucio will help escort people around the map to give them more map control. Setting up dives. Zen, once we got there, right? Once the angles were achieved, Zen could then walk and discord something right when the dive happened, right? You may be thinking to yourself, well, who protects Zen? Everyone does, actually. Just not directly. It's not like you have a Brig sitting on him or Lucio sits in the back line. While you set up, the rest of your team is marking the enemy team, marking their Tracer, their Ball. Specifically the Ball, actually, to prevent him from having the HP and preventing the other flankers from having the resources needed to take a proper engage. Tracer can do this extremely well with high range and that projectile size increase. Basically, her effective DPS was so high that Tracer could be on one angle, see a Ball on another angle, and effectively mark him from her angle, like all the way over there, because she did so much damage. She could basically be in two places at once with the amount of value she got. Like, Tracer is so good. Basically has been a must pick this entire season, apart from some other comps that we'll talk about later. But, if your team can force the enemy team to lose enough health, lose enough resources to cause them all to fall back, you can take that space and set up your dive. It ends up being pretty feast or famine, I would say. But by the time OWCS started, no one was playing this comp anymore. Why is that? Well, for one, Ball doesn't really mitigate damage, or avoid damage. So it's really hard for him to set up properly when Tracer, Echo, Soj, Lucio, even Zen sometimes, they're marking him and they're so prevalent in that meta. He's fast, but he's big, and popping shields is best used during engages, not before, where he is at most at risk. You want to shield your engages, but if you're not using shields before you go in, then you're losing a lot of health on the engage, and health is what you need to take engages. It's very hard to make Ball work properly. And of course, Zen, even with his buffs and that hotfix nerf that he got, is still very fragile. And since he has to play so far back, he effectively can't help take any space. Like, he can't do anything because giving up his location would make him like instantly targetable for dives. And it would probably get him killed. So, this is where the meta opens up, right? NA Hive Mind, the NA Hive Mind strikes again, and they try to force Brawl, right? Brawl with In APAC, they went for a dive, right? So we saw a lot of different looks during this time between the hotfix and the mid-season patch. Ram, Zar, Doom, Winston, all of those were in the mix. Some mixtures of Lucio Kiri comps, some Lucio Moira in there. Some more DPS like Reaper made their way into the fray. But what's the idea? Like, why was the meta not as defined anymore? It's kind of like why has it opened up so much? Well, I would say like the major question this season, like when you're playing any kind of comp, like the questions that you're asking yourself is, how do we take engages with more resources, specifically health, than the other team? And that's where the methods differ. The Brawl answer, what you're seeing here, to certain degrees, LRG right now is playing like an Ashe, like a little pokier, but BSC, they're playing Brawl, rush, basically. The Brawl answer is very direct. It's damage mitigation, right? Ram can get into fights more directly without losing as much health if he plays his cards right, like his shield, right? Lucio's a big factor of play here as well. You pair him with a high damage DPS that can pressure the other tank to further widen the resource gap, and you've created a very traditional rush comp, with the focus being much more on enemy pressure than sustaining death balls like it would have in the past. Once you have that resource advantage, then you can push your luck and then just all run as 5. That's what BSC actually just did there. Let me see what else I have here. You don't want super long fights, but ideally you won't have to take any, right? So that's kind of that comp. On the opposite end of the coin, you've got the divier version, right? If we pick characters that don't take damage because they move too fast and get out of the enemy's effective range, then why don't we just hit them hard and hit them fast? And, that sounds a lot like the ball comp, right? But the key difference here is that if you mess up, or, you don't have to go as fast and as hard as ball comp because you have so much mobility and so much potential to play a little slower. You can go in more increments than the ball comp can. If you mess up an engage, you can get out and fall back a little and try again with your angles and everything. That's where this Doom, even Winston, like Kiri version comes in. Everybody wants to play a little more passive, just hold your angles more. The team forms, and I think this is like big, right? Everyone, they form little groups a lot of the time. So Lucio and a DPS go together, Kiri and a DPS go together. Doom can kind of be on his own, but just kind of more thinking of LOS of his Kiri. They're very effective with this kind of style. You get like 3 little cores that can all create angles, basically. And it'd be hard to pin them down and hard for them to lose resources before the fight. If they aren't properly marked. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that without losing a lot of map control. So, against Brawl, right? If you were to play this against Brawl, you just keep poking them while they're moving around, and they'll lose some health, sure, but you guys are going to lose a lot more resources than this team that just completely runs away and stops taking damage while you guys have to heal up with your limited Moira resource. So that's why, from my own observation, this was the comp, right? This was the comp that I thought was the strongest. But there's actually another one that, let me finish this. It's the strongest, very versatile. It can keep up with any pace, and it counters the Brawl. Like, Doom is really good into rush styles. But before we move on to Hell on Earth with the Mauga patch, which we'll get there, I would like to bring up a hybrid version of these playstyles. That's going to be kind of important for setting up the rest of the series. And that's actually going to be this Zarya comp here. Not many teams played this. Luminosity played this because they have Dante, who's a really big Zar player. But I do want to go run through how this one works because it's really interesting. Basically, it's kind of like a hybrid, right? So There's the Lucio Kiri divey style that actually ran, you could run Zar with it. Basically, Zar plays super far back, kind of like Zen, right? And bubbles her flankers more aggressively to take space and give herself charge. And then once she has full charge and that space was created, then she can walk up and start snowballing the fight, right? So she mitigates her teammates' damage. They can be a little more aggressive while they take space, take the resources out for free with their bubbles, right? And then since her damage was so low at the begin with, she just kind of stays back like the Zen. This comp was hard to play because if you don't set everything up right and if your Zar does not get charge, she gets ran at. There's nothing stopping them from running at her. If she has to use bubbles for herself while she doesn't have charge, it's probably over. So this was really hard. But basically what I want you to keep in mind is that this is a Brawl tank that is enabling dives and is playing more for survival and not losing their health and resources than for carry potential, right? I think this is going to define the rest of the season because although the tanks are kind of what define like general play style, it's the rest of the team that defines how we play, if we're divier, right? So with Tracer and Lucio and Kiri and Sojourn, who you will see a lot for the rest of the season, they're dictating the play style. It's what tank best helps them accomplish what they want, right? This Zarya style, I think, is interesting and it's a cool idea. But let's go ahead and throw a lot of that out the window because we have to talk about this guy. Mauga is here. So the mid-season patch ruined everything. The DPS passive was lowered and Mauga was giga buff. So the meta became actually still up in the air a little, but Mauga was a must pick, basically. There were some instances where you could counter Mauga with Ori, but for the most part, Mauga was king, right? So there were two versions of this comp that you could play. It was, and guess what? Guess what they are, right? It's a brawlier version and kind of a divier version. What you're seeing right here is what most teams played initially. It's the brawlier version. So this is 6-man with Mauga, Sombra, Reaper. Basically pressure the other Mauga and make him run away, and then the rest of the team has to run away, right? So that's the initial push with this. It's designed to pressure the tank to use their abilities first and force them to leave so you can take the space, right? They're going to have to leave. They don't want to die and lose. They have to leave. And then they'll have to come re-engage at a disadvantage. Sombra and Reaper can put a lot of pressure on Mauga and be relatively safe from him. And of course, Lucio and Moira are a very survivable backline. This was strong, and it's generally pretty easy to run. It's a lot like other comps. It's classic. It's easy. The other variant with the Kiri and like Sim and other stuff and Soj, it's a little harder to play. The other variant has a lot more counter Mauga like that Sim. But they opt for Kiri over Moira, which allows for much more mobile flanking DPS like Sojourn and Tracer to kind of try and get away from the Mauga core and just pressure him from afar. You could opt for Sim, who could pressure Mauga a lot with Beam and get value from Cardiac, and also TP out of Cage and basically ignore that extremely good ability. But what really makes these versions of the comp more popular a little later into the week, yes, only a week, was that they completely shut down a lot of the cardiac value from the enemy Mauga, right? The rest of the team takes angles and pressures Mauga, forcing an early shout, and then your Mauga can just run away and wait it out, and then go get a better shout on their Mauga. And then it's going to force him to leave, right? It's kind of, you kind of see everything, you re-engage with Lucio. I like to call it like a game of chicken, basically. Like, who's going to shout first and get their cooldown forced? And aka like who can survive longer and disengage the opponent's engage better. Of course, there's much more of these comps, a lot of micro stuff. In fact, many pros, Hawk, really like this meta because it brought a lot of depth and team play to make it work effectively. Even if Mauga isn't necessarily the most fun tank for everybody. But as we all know, the hotfix patch after the midseason, like literally a week, nerfed Cardiac back. along with some Sim and Sombra changes. Um, and basically, Mauga kind of went away, even though he still played in EU. And another character took their place, which was this one. This old chestnut of a hero, Orisa, right? So that leaves us with our current meta, right? This is where we are right now. Remember how I said people were picking Ori in to counter Mauga? Well, with that guy out of the picture, she has come to take his place. Ori can hold space exceptionally well and does not require many resources until much, much later in fights than most tanks, right? So she is allowed to play at range and more safe because she has no fall off on her gun's damage and she has a long range stun ability. So while Ori is playing her life, she is still assisting with draining resources and taking space away from the enemy. So this allows Lucio and Kiri to play much more aggressively with their DPS, and they hold stronger angles and positions on the map since Ori does not need those resources, right? So then it becomes this game of holding ground for as long as you can until you get a pick and force the enemy team into bad spots, or your Ori runs out of cooldowns and must be taxied away, right? The thing about this is that once this happened, your DPS are still set up and probably still on their angles, right? So, even if you're giving a little space to get resources back, that doesn't mean the end of the fight is there. In fact, you may be baiting them into your DPS's angles, right? And into their pressure. So if they over-aggress on you and push too far, they get collapsed on. This is dive, isn't it? This is dive. It's these insane angles and baiting your team into them, right? Playing in the open space, thinking they're okay, and then they get collapsed on without knowing it, right? Ori can help with this dive. She is still contributing something, right? You're soft engaging and getting resources out and then hard punishing mistakes with your superior map positioning. It's very similar to this Zar comp and also to that Mauga comp. How effectively can you pressure the tank and get their resources out? How effectively can you reclaim space from flankers and put them in a checkmate scenario, and put them in the checkmate scenario they put you in? How good is your tempo and your restraint? How good is your pathing to make sure you don't take as much damage as before engaging? These are all questions that need to be answered at the beginning of the season, but the solutions have changed, right? Now you can still run different tanks here and there. There is variation. There's a Winston is still played on the dive maps. Mauga can counter that Winston. Ori counters the Mauga. Winston kind of counters the Ori comp. Just focus on getting the squishies out of the way and kind of ignoring the Ori. We still have this triangle like we often do with these comps, but it's typically Ori, right? It's dive fundamentals with different coats of paint, basically. I've actually really enjoyed watching this meta grow over the last 2 months, and I'm excited to see how it's shaken up the next couple, or how it's going to be shaken up the next couple of seasons. We only have, by the time this video gets posted, we only have about a week, maybe even less, of this meta. So Ori won't be here too much longer, and Venture will be here. Maybe they'll shake up the meta more. But I think this is something to focus on going forward. I do not think sustain is going to work very well, and I really think that unless they make some big changes to some of these characters like Sojourn, Tracer, Lucio, Kiri, that this is how the game is going to be played for a little bit of, for a couple more months, basically. I think this is the change that they wanted to see in how the game plays. And I think this is pretty healthy. I think in general, these metas are really fun. Even if you are playing some tanks that aren't nearly as fun, right? So, I think where we've ended up, this is a good spot. I do hope Ori is a little less oppressive. I would want her damage fall off to go away a little bit because, or to come back a little bit because she is very oppressive. But yeah, I really like this meta, and I think this is where we're heading to. So, if you made it this far, thank you so much. Please be sure to check out my other socials and also do all that YouTube stuff, the like, comment, subscribe. I did film this live twitch.tv/Lane Hemingway if you want to discuss or talk about some of these changes. I try to do 2 YouTube videos a week as it stands. Hopefully I can do 3 coming up sooner. But yeah, this is one of those. And if you like what you see, again, please do anything that you can to help out. I really appreciate it. And thank you for watching. Have a good day.